How goes it, fellas? Some pathetic, modern, mimetic cloud pacifist man made his way into my Discord server and said my videos are too long for his feeble mind. So, normally I disregard this as the damned foolish nonsense that it obviously is, but it's not exactly the first time I'm hearing this, so enjoy this useless 5-second video. You might remember a certain diagram from my last video, and I'll explain that a bit more in this one. Basically, I was watching Randall Carlson's analysis of Stonehenge for the 50th time and thought, 666 is the number of the beast, huh? Given that it's related to the Earth's velocity around the sun, which is 66600 miles per hour, or 66600 or whatever, I thought, okay, I'll just draw a circle with that circumference and see what happens. Then I thought, okay, so God is the original circle, and he created Earth in 6 days. And good it was, right? And that's what you see geometrically. 6 circles make the seed of life, or whatever the hell it's called. And a circle, remember, is the same everywhere in the universe. So this isn't just some dumb shit we invented that's specific to some human context in Israel at some point in time. This is eternal, obviously. Anyway, the radius of the outer circle is of course Earth, meaning it's 3960 miles, or in this case 39.6 feet, just like the outer bluestone circle in Stonehenge. If you aren't sure why miles, feet, and hours and whatnot are close to cosmically perfect measurements, just watch the 2-hour lecture by Randall Carlson. Or don't, I'm not your fucking dad. Anyway. Earth is this little thing on the top right, and long story short, I just kept drawing circles in GeoGebra until I reached the edge of the bestial 666 circle. And what do you know? 72 white circles. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever come up with this, but it's not like I'll ever know, because I'm not paying half my monthly salary to sacredgeometry.com, and the Freemasons aren't responding to my emails. So anyway. The 72 white circles seem to represent truth, among a billion other things, I'm sure, but what the hell is truth anyway? Yeah, don't worry, this isn't going to be some directionless philosophical ego rant like you're probably used to. Friedrich! I think there's some very definite and practical answers to be found. So, the snake is the beast, the all-encompassing, the devil, the horned serpent, the bidetlich in the Diné language, Jormungandr, or Loge in Danish, or Loki, as you might know him. And what do they all have in common, huh? Well, it's almost literally an endless story, but I can show you how these ideas connect. Remember, that's the overarching goal of the snake in terms of what I'm founding at the moment. It's to bring the disjointed pieces of fragmented beliefs and consciousnesses together into not only something coherent, but also the exactly true description of life and existence. So, let us commence forth. Loki is literally described as the instigator, or the one who moves the story by Snorri Sturluson, the Icelandic king who wrote a lot of what we know about Norse mythology today. Loki obviously also represents the intellect, him being the trickster, being able to transform his shape at will, meaning he's the creator of illusion, you could say. It's very, very similar to the Satan figure I was describing in the video you're seeing on screen right now. He's also half Jotun, which literally means devourer in Old Norse, and his son is of course Jormungandr himself, the all-encompassing world serpent. Also keep in mind that Loki's punishment for causing the death of Bala, the beloved sun god representing summer, was to be burned by venom in perpetuity. Killing summer is, of course, exactly what time does. The cycle simply moves along, turning forever, regardless of which point you prefer. Notice how there's the edge of the world in green, and then there's the edge of existence, or the universe itself, demarcated by the all-encompassing snake. The word universe literally means universus, meaning one turn. It also sounds like one conflict, which is what versus means in the context of a conflict, like when comparing two different concepts, or conceptualizing two opponents fighting each other. It's one versus the other, right? The pinnacle of the snake is, of course, the gaping void and the stinging tail. the duality of feminine and masculine. You're probably starting to see how this is starting to come together, right? There's so many disjointed pieces that seemingly fit partially into this diagram. And you combine enough of them, you get the full picture. And the diagram is definitely the right one. It's, for example, one of the implicit or unconscious bases for the book of Revelation, for example, but we'll get to that in the end. Anyway, you might think, but wait a second, Jormungandr doesn't have a stinging tail, and Loki isn't a snake. And yeah, as I said, none of them fit perfectly into the concept. Perfection isn't what we, as the snake, need to pursue, but rather its wholeness. You can watch this video if you don't know exactly why, but you should kind of already have an instinctive feeling for how that makes sense. Loge's name likely stems from either the Proto-Germanic word lok, meaning not, or the Old Norse word logi, which means either ember, blaze, fire. Words had much more diffuse meanings back then. Again, my other videos explain that more. Both options actually make sense in this case, which is what leads me to believe that Loge, the god, or at least the subconscious precursor to the concept of Loge, actually predated the two practical concepts of rope or fire. For example, a knot, meaning a rope tied together to form a loop around a juncture where it's tied together, is obviously analogous to the snake. I mean, just tie a knot on a rope yourself and look at it. I barely even have to explain myself here. Whether it's two opposing ropes tied together like the duality of a snake, or whether it's just a simple single knot, they both mirror the snake in rather obvious ways. The single knot on one rope mirrors it more precisely, and that makes perfect sense because the first knot ever tied was tied on the first rope ever made. And in the beginning, you only have one rope, right? The simplistic, shitty, barely functioning rope that was the first rope ever made by, let's say, Germanic people. Like, I don't know, but you get the idea. It's no coincidence that the more primal or simple variation fits even better. Then there's the second option, which is even more telling. Ember. Well, what was it that the snake did in the Garden of Eden? It made humans self-aware. The Garden of Eden snake is literally described as a trickster, although as far as I'm concerned, it literally just spoke the truth to Eve. But then again, it obviously led to the negative emotion catastrophe of self-consciousness as well. I honestly think it's pretty pathetic of many Christians to try to claw their way back into blissful unawareness by going to heaven. But hey, that's neither here nor there. Let's just focus on the subject matter at hand, like objective scientists, right, boys? So, fire-bringing consciousness is also nothing new. The myth of Prometheus shows the same phenomenon, and even literally speaking, using and utilizing fire was an important step in the human progression towards greater awareness of existence. Using tools, intelligence, the illusory intellect, it's obviously difficult to separate when you get to the root of it. And obviously the same goes for the rope as well. Remember the Proto-Indo-European word ar, which is the origin of all the masculine concepts you're seeing on the top right in this diagram. It literally meant to put together, which is partially the ah sound that you make when you reach the moment when you put an idea together in your mind. But of course, it's also the putting together of tools. The two aren't mutually exclusive because this was a more diffuse and all-encompassing consciousness structure that they had back then. I mean, just think, how do you tie things together? With a rope, obviously. Long story short, whether it's the forbidden fruit of psychedelics, fire, rope, the attacking and open mouth of the snake causing ego consciousness in the man who stares at it and gets scared, the idea is the same. The snake brings consciousness. Notice that alarm also stems from the original ar, and so does the word original. Both Loki and the Garden of Eden snake, which is of course also the devil, are both forces that make the story happen, while all they're instigating is still seen as undesirable or evil in some way. Without the snake in the beginning, you have no consciousness, no existence, no Bible even, which might upset some fundamentalists watching, but honestly, who cares? And remember, Snorri himself says, Loki is the mover of stories. And now remember the diagram. The circumference of the circle is 666. It's the revolving serpent, the movement of time and space. Space-time obviously being a single force in reality. This is something Hindu mystics have known for thousands of years somehow. The Earth moves through time and space around the Sun, which is of course the metaphorical equivalent of God, origin of all life force that we have. It's slowly dying, all that. I mean, just look at the goddamn diagram, it's all there. It moves at 66,600 miles per hour, the mile and the hour obviously being time and space. And here's another thing from Bidetlich, the horned serpent of the American Indians. It was originally a man that turned into a demon because it chose to sacrifice its humanity for revenge. This is kinda like the stories of Cain and Abel being bundled together with the Garden of Eden original sin story. Cain obviously killing Abel out of revenge for having a better life than himself, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Think back to my first two videos. Unfairness and injustice are inseparable from existence. If you achieve total equality in every domain, what you get is something other than existence, because existence is based on contrast. Watch the justice video if that seems confusing. So, the original injustice was precisely to create existence, to destroy the perfectly balanced primordial forces between Apsu and Tiamat, let's say. This obviously being very similar to the Garden of Eden story and also the logic/evidence-oriented explanation I give in the Point of Existence video. So, it naturally follows that if we look at this from a justice perspective, existence itself, or the snake itself, is eternally angry and stewing in its own venom for even existing, because the fact that we even have existence is based on the original unfairness that can only be resolved by omnipotence or total death, both of which would remove life and existence. The snake is like the universe itself, or time itself, constantly scaring you, hurting you, damaging you, and ultimately also trying to kill you. I mean, just go into a forest without supplies for a couple of days if you think that's an exaggeration. And it tries to kill you out of revenge for the absolute injustice that had to happen for life to even exist. We also feel this within ourselves, of course. All of this suffering, all this pain, for what? What's the point? The answer for millennia has been to simply be closer to God, be more perfect, efficient, diligent, moral, responsible, civilized, knowledgeable, concentrated. In other words, just to be more masculine. But, nowadays it's clear to anyone with a pulse that it's necessary to integrate both sides in order to move forward. The snake obviously embodies this. The feminine void and the masculine force are both at the apex facing opposite directions, but still mirroring each other, of course, because they're inseparable. The force can be seen as an arrow, direction, the force that splits reality apart, the force that combines the parts of reality into something greater, which is, for example, what the Cortex and the God of Perception Marduk do. Marduk cuts reality into pieces, or rather, he cuts the corpse of Tiamat into pieces, let's say, and he makes the world out of it. But hold on, isn't masculinity to put things together? I mean, that's what Ad literally means. So what's with this splitting things apart thing? That would be a good question, if you came up with that yourself. And the answer is, well, use your fucking brain, dude. You can't put things together without them first being separate to begin with. The cognitive process starts out with small fragmented pieces. In the beginning it's individual photons hitting your retina, hitting individual receptors, those being processed into lines and edges, those being processed into concepts and shapes and whatnot. And in the end, you have the higher order concepts that are much, much more all-encompassing. Again, smaller fragmented parts get combined into a greater whole. You can't just have one end of the process and ignore the other end. That's just stupid. So just look again. Femininity and masculinity, the branching into infinite space and the direction and putting together towards a single point, are two sides of existence. Either can exist without the other. You can't put things together that aren't already split apart, and you can't split anything apart, or you can't disintegrate, or you can't branch out if you aren't already concentrated in some way. This is why I don't just call this chaos and order. Those are simply states or snapshots of a single moment. You could say that complete chaos is the vertical line and that perfect order is either of the 2 points on each end of the diagram. Neither of them are two-dimensional, neither exists within time and space, and only as abstract and timeless concepts. Femininity and masculinity, however, are the forces that move through time and space, transforming reality. Disintegration seems to be purely feminine. I mean, just look at the branching, right? But what happens during disintegration? You start out with a whole, which fragments into distinct smaller pieces. And that's masculine, isn't it? Being distinct from the outside world is of the masculine domain. As I said, the opposites are inseparable in actual reality, and all that's necessary is for you to flip your perspective for them to suddenly be the opposite of what they originally seemed to be. Remember how I insulted like half my viewers by calling Christianity pathetic? Well, here's the reason. They think that the snake, or the devil, is something to escape from. Escape from the real world into heaven, escape from sin by being innocent, or innocent as doves, as that pathetic idiot I mentioned earlier put it. So, if you actually believe in this, I just have this to say. Just use your eyes for once, right? The snake made humans open them for a reason. The truth touches all, originates from God, also touches God, also touches the snake, also touches the world. So what gives us? Is the diagram just wrong? Well, no. And I'll demonstrate that near the end, but just listen for now. So, what is the truth? Well, as always, we can look at the language to get a direct glimpse into the evolution of concepts. And what we see is a surprising overlap and interchangeability of words over time. And if you didn't watch a previous video, basically because words directly connect to higher order concepts in the mind, bypassing all the material criteria for activating the concept, they allow you to cluster higher order concepts together in any which way you want simply by moving your attention around. That's what it means to say sentences, essentially, or simply to think in a directed and conscious manner. To move your attention like any animal moves through the real world with intent. That's basically it. Anyway, let's begin. So, German, Wahrheit, wahr. To say that something is true is to say, das hier ist wahr, etwas ist wahr. Danish, Sandhill, sant. This is true means der sant. English, truth, true, but trust originates from the same root word. Now you might think, well, hold on, these words all obviously stem from different roots, right? Well, let's keep looking. Danish, tro, meaning in English, faith/belief. To say, jeg tror på Gud means I believe in God. Jeg tror dig means I believe you. Tro, faith, true, Sandhill. So, German, trauen. In English, to trust. Ich traue dir means I trust you. Russian, вероятно. German, wahrscheinlich. English, probably. Bulgarian, viervam. Latin, credo. Spanish, creo. English, I believe. English, true. Latin, verum. German, wahr. Now remember the Danish word sant again. Latin, sanus, meaning in English, healthy. In Danish, sund og rask, which means healthy and able to move. Rask is related to the German word rasch, which means quick. And now, remember why the brain even exists to begin with. It's in order to move. Once the sea slug has found a spot it likes, it consumes its own brain and it stays there forever because it no longer needs to move. It no longer needs a brain. It's as simple as that. And speaking is, of course, also movement, but more in a metaphorical sense. I mean, you obviously use a muscle to talk. The tongue is a muscle. But what you move isn't your body per se, but you rather use words to direct attention towards the mind. It's like if you picture the ego as being particularly active neurons, you move your ego throughout your cortex between different concepts at will, right? It's what I mentioned earlier, basically. You use words to explore the inside world the same way that other living beings explore the outside world. Anyway, we clearly have these root words. Tro, true, trauen, sand, sano, sunt, gesund, sane, and of course, va, verayatna, viervam, vero, verum. So, what do we make of all this? Well, there's obviously a lot, but what's clear is that the concepts of truth, health, ability to do things, belief, faith, and that which permeates all existence, God, the world, and is encased within the snake, remember, the white circles, they are somehow, for some reason, interchangeable. And why is that? Well, here's the big answer. So, what is the truth? Well, think of what truth is neurologically. Every single concept in your cortex exists because a positive emotion decided that it's important. If you decide this is food, you take a bite out of it, and it tastes good and nourishes you, that means that whatever the basis for you believing that it was food was, now gets reinforced. If the opposite turns out to be the case, the neural connections that led you to believe that this was food would be reinforced as repulsive instead. And they wouldn't predict food, they would predict something you should avoid putting in your mouth, basically. So long story short, if a concept in your mind allows you to act in a way that's conducive to life, whether it's your own life or life itself, then it's the truth. If you can predict the outside world reliably, if the inner world is in synchronicity with the outside world, if it's conducive to your health, then it's the truth. There's no other way of knowing anything, even theoretically. Any other method of truth would simply die off as it's in conflict with reality, existence, the snake, Darwinistic selection, call it whatever the fuck you want. I don't even care at this point. And remember, verayatna means wahrscheinlich in German and probably in English. This is how it all connects. Every concept in your mind, every idea you have, every decision you make is ultimately a gamble. It's you betting that what you currently think of the outside world is actually true. That the inside world and the outside world are sufficiently synchronous for you to act in it with success. There's no separating action from faith, faith from betting on limited knowledge, that from health, and health from morality. I mean, remember, I believe in English, viervam in Bulgarian, jeg tror in Danish, in God we trust on the American dollar bill. If you haven't already decided that both the inside and the outside world should be a certain way, you have no basis for acting at all. Without emotion, you have no direction. You have negative emotion consciousness from the snake, the danger of the outside world, whatever you want to call it. You have positive, worldly emotions, let's say, like love, pleasure, confidence, excitement. And then there's that final, indescribable feeling of knowing exactly what you need to do. That feeling you get when discovering some profound truth, let's say, or doing what's morally right despite being afraid of it, or just intense belief in God, let's say. It all amounts to the same feeling. I think we can all draw that from our own experience. And you see how it all lines up with the diagram? The truth touches all existence, and to say that belief in the highest moral ideal is more important than fear of death or your desire for love or food or sex would simply be to miss the bigger picture. All of them are a part of existence, and they either work in unison or they rip each other apart, and then existence just disappears eventually. And one last thing. Wahrscheinlich. Probably. The word probably stems from the same root word as the word proper. If you don't know how things should be, you have no reason to do anything. And remember from my previous videos, the meaning of life can't only be found in action. Unless you're talking about it on an abstract level, of course. But your life is not just the abstract level. I mean, why do you think people are so depressed, especially young people, especially as time has gone on since the Cultural Revolution of the 60s and 70s? I mean, just think, what would happen, theoretically, if you suddenly lost all your emotion, let's say a year ago or whatever? No neural connections would be reinforced because there's no positive emotion to back anything up. There would be no motivation. Your cortex would simply process information according to whatever pattern it had when the positive guiding force disappeared, while slowly disintegrating because neural connections slowly lose their strength if not reinforced, right? You can obviously make a very simple analogy to the death of God happened and then the culture stagnated and disintegrated. Whatever, who cares? But yeah, it basically is the story of Western culture. So yeah, all things considered, I think the diagram is pretty good. It's pretty acceptable. Yeah. Oh, and don't worry, I didn't forget the Book of Revelation shit. So, okay, just listen to this crazy shit, right? And tell me afterwards that the diagram isn't fucking incredible. Revelation 12:3. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness, to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Well, would you look at that, huh? A third of the stars in the sky, huh? Well, how about we do some fun little counting? I'm sure that's fun. All those overlapping circles make it real easy. Just count the white circles of truth that don't touch the earth, and let's just count that as stars. I mean, that's what stars are, right? Bright white things in the sky. They don't actually tend to be on the planet very often, as far as I know. Done? Great. Now count the circles that directly touch the snake. So what do you get? 36 stars in total. 12 of them directly touch the snake. So, what is 36 divided by 12, huh? That's your homework for today. And also, the snake wants to devour the masculine. I mean, just look at its mouth, huh? The male son who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter doesn't get much more masculine than that. I mean, it's literally the tip of the pyramid, for God's sake. And of course, remember, Jormungandr kills Thor, the masculine lightning god, who at his core represents life force and vigor. I'm not going to explain why. The guy on screen here made some nice videos about it. It's not completely accurate as far as I can tell, but it's very good still. Anyway, Jormungandr was hit so hard by Mjolnir that he was knocked back in time to his birth. So, yeah, you know, I really could go on all day about this whole space-time, revolving circle shit. The 1260 day thing, by the way, that you might remember that and still be confused by it. I don't even know what that means yet. I mean, in the Book of Revelations, a lot of things are split up by 7. You know, the 7 seals, the 7 bowls of God's wrath, or whatever. So I figure, well, 3.5, that means it's half of the cycle, so you're in the belly of the beast. You know, the bottom of the cycle, that's where you are during the reign of Satan. But I don't goddamn know. The Book of Revelation is so goddamn complicated. I'm amazed that I've decoded anything within it at all. Anyway, where the hell was I? Let me just check my script real quick. 1 second, boys. Oh yeah, another thing from Revelation. This is 19:11. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down all the nations. He will rule them all with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in midair, Come gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty, of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, great and small. Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together, to wage war against the rider on the horse and his army. But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. With these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The 2 of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. The rest were killed with the sword coming out of the mouth of the rider of the horse, and all the birds gorged themselves on their flesh. I mean, okay, do I even need to say anything here? The truth coming out of his mouth, right? The sword out of his mouth. It's such an obvious metaphor for truth. I mean, it's also extremely common, so I'm not even going to explain that one. As for the whole deceiver of the earth and Satan being the deceiver of the earth thing, well, it's part of the whole Christian vision and consciousness structure, right? Anything touching the snake is evil. So the 12 outer circles, or whatever the hell, they are the bad thing, let's say. They are the stars that fall from the sky. They're his angels, you could also say. It's what needs to be defeated anyway. I mean, how else do you explain Satan fighting with angels, right? There's obviously many ways to interpret it, but you get the point. It's like the diagram just reveals itself in so many goddamn different ways. And obviously it's also like, well, yeah, what emotion makes you lie or makes you speak falsehoods or whatever? It's almost always out of fear, right? That's the negative emotion emanating from the snake, from death, from the limits of your world, whatever you want to call it. Again, the underlying concept is the same, regardless of what word you use to describe it. The truth coming from the snake, let's say, is the most damaging. Look, it's not like I understand this completely, right? But you kind of see the pattern anyway. And now we get to the more obvious parts, right? His name is known only to himself. Well, where do we know that from, right? Judaism, you can't speak the name of God. You just have the letters YHWH, basically. It's the same idea. God is the perfect immaterial, and therefore using a physical spoken word that is tainted by the sinful material world, that is to do God an injustice by representing God in a way that isn't perfectly true, right? Again, it's this perfectionized, hyper-masculinized idea of truth that doesn't touch all existence, right? Remember, the stars touching the snake are evil or they're cast down from the skies, right? I think, anyway, that's the subconscious process leading to the vision. Because remember, this vision obviously represents something very fundamental. I mean, if I talked to the guy somehow who had these visions, who would disagree with almost everything I said, of course. But the thing he's describing and the thing I'm describing can be shown with the same diagram, right? So depending on your moral system, let's say, the fundamental of what existence is can be interpreted many different ways. I, of course, think mine's the better one, but of course I think that, right? I mean, he lived 1800 years ago. It's entirely possible that the moral beliefs he had back then were exactly what the world needed then. And, times have changed, the great year cycle, all that shit. Let's not get into it for now, but I hope that what I'm saying makes sense. I'm going so far off script here. But yeah, anyway, God's name can't be known exactly by the human world. It can only be approximated. You get the idea. It's what I've been saying this whole goddamn video. But yeah, right. So there is no perfection in the real world. So there's only various ways of approximating it. So, for example, the diagram, right? The 666 circle doesn't exactly run tangent to the outer 12 circles. It's stupidly close, but it's not perfect. And it's also impossible to square the circle, no matter what. Like, pi is an irrational number. No matter how goddamn insanely well we approximate it, no matter how many trillions of decimals we get down, we'll never finish. No matter what. It's impossible. It's right. It's baked into the structure of existence. feminine and masculine aren't in the perfect union that they used to be before existence began, let's say. And, you know, you can say this in other ways too. Like the Earth's speed around the sun. Remember, I said 66,600, you know, it's 666,000 miles per hour. Well, it's not exactly that. It's really 66616, so 16 extra miles per hour, right? It's not perfect. It's insanely close, just like the diagram, just like, you know, our rational understanding of what exactly the number pi is, right? It's insanely close for any purpose we might ever have in practice. It's more than good enough. It's way more than good enough, but it's not perfect, and it never will be, like anything else. Or other examples. The Earth's radius is slightly above 3960 miles, and the Moon's is slightly below 1800. You remember the Stonehenge proportions. 3960 and 1080. And even when you use these quote-unquote perfect numbers, right, you use those to square the circle with the Stonehenge proportions or the Moon and Earth proportions, even then, you don't get a perfect squaring of the circle. You get an error of around 0.3%, basically. You get the idea, right? No absolute perfection in the real world. That's not what existence is. That's why I get so pissed off at the Christian vision, which is like, well, we just have to just force ourselves through. We just gotta be more perfect. Just resist those sinful impulses. Just keep resisting. Just control everything with your rationality. Like, no, that leads to disaster in the very long run. I mean, you know, took more than 1,000 years for it to fully manifest, but the symptoms of rationality taken too far and extreme, I mean, you know, they're everywhere. I explained it in the other videos. Just go watch them, you know? It'll be fun. It'll be very fun seeing all the problems of your society laid out, and now you have to go fix them. It's incredibly fun. But you get the idea, right? The purely rational mind looks only for what's absolutely and perfectly provable, which is impossible, as I just explained, I believe. So it inevitably disintegrates, and it dies if it's not held up by the irrational feminine. And that's what faith is. That which connects the perfect and the all-encompassing. The rational, the irrational, the masculine, and the feminine. Oh, and one last thing from Revelation. The guy, you know, the warrior of God, his robe was dipped in blood. His white robe was dipped in blood, and he has the name, Lord of Lords, King of Kings. It's God, right? But look at the diagram. What do the circles touch on the outermost edge? Oh, look, it's the red snake. Oh, God, what a coincidence, huh? God, that's just crazy, huh? A weird coincidence you can tell people at parties or whatever the fuck you do. Yeah, I think that's it. Let me just look at the script, guys. I think that's it. But yeah, sorry for making this one long as well. I swear to God, I tried, but the script just kept getting bigger and bigger. And like, whoops, you know? Wasn't trying to make a 40-minute video, but it just happened, right? Just, you know, it just happens. You just click a bunch of keys on your keyboard, all of a sudden you have a video that's a little bigger than you intended. I originally literally thought that my goddamn friend could use this to promote on TikTok because the video would be so snappy and quick, but perchance not. Anyway, thanks for watching all this shit anyway, fellas.
You thunder against me.